everyone. I am Benjamin Lindsay, managing editor here at Backstage. Just going to give it a couple seconds for our waiting room to clear into our actual live audience. But thanks for joining us today. We have Paul Simms and Stefani Robinson joining us, showrunner, writer, EP for What We Do in the Shadows, freshly minted with all this Emmys love, which I was so happy to see. How did you two first get the news? I'm sure that Emmys nominations morning reads a little differently given the state of the world this year. But yeah, how was the news received? How did it all come together for you?
I was sleeping, and this is just one of those years, I guess most years it's the case, where I just was not thinking about Emmy nominations at all. It was on my radar in the way that it was just like buried in the very back recesses of my mind, but I was sleeping in and had not realized it was the day that they were supposed to be announced. My brother was staying with me, and he starts just like banging on the door, comes in with the phone, and it's my dad on the phone, wakes me up, and I thought something terrible had happened. It was awful. He was just like, I was like, what's going on? Why is he calling? And my brother was like, I don't know. He just really wants to talk to you. And I'm like, oh my God, something, someone collapsed. The dog is dead or something like that. But my dad was on the phone and he's like, congrats, you guys were nominated for a ton of Emmys. 8. So that's, it was a little bit of a heart attack.
Better news than the passing of the dog, for sure.
Exactly. The dog is fine. The dog is great.
Yes, yeah. Well, yeah, as I said, I'm such a fan of this show. Now you're 2 seasons strong. How far, I know that season 3 was picked up before the madness of the world, or it might have been while the madness of the world was happening. Are you working on season 3 right now? Are you being quote unquote productive during this time, or what's that look like for you?
Yes, we have. I mean, we've been productive all through the pandemic. When the sort of quarantine and everything started, we were just really starting to edit season 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to figure out how to do all our editing, which we usually do, it's a lot of editing, sound mixing, color correction. It's a lot of people usually gathering in person. So we sort of figured out how to do it all remotely. And then at the same time, we were starting the writing of season 3, which we did via Zoom, which is, the scripts are starting to come in and we've got a really great season plan, but Zoom is an awful way to work, at least as far as a writer's room goes.
Yeah.
You want to be in there with everyone and talking and laughing at each other's jokes, and Zoom just slows everything down. So that definitely made things harder. But then again, I have to say on a social level, it was, we're also isolated. It was great to see everyone every day.
I thought, it was great for like mental health purposes to be stuck inside, not allowed to see someone.
Once we transitioned into actually talking about the work stuff, it was like, because at the point, when you're in the room, someone's saying something funny and then you start laughing and then your laughter cuts off what they were saying. And then you're like, no, you go. And it's whatever. But it's going to be a good season.
He's staring at the season 3 writers cork board.
This is another flaw of Zoom. If all 278 of you were here in the room with me, you would see that when I look that way, I'm looking at the board that has all the episodes laid out. But
so it's isolation, but never a break. You are deep in it. Yeah.
Yes.
Obviously not the preferred mode, but I'm glad to hear that it's at least underway, because you have a lot of people who want their eyes on that 3rd season.
Yeah.
Now, to rewind it a little bit, I know that both of you are familiar with Backstage. Our audience today is not only fans of the show, but kind of those working actors, creators of the world. I'd love to hear just how this first came together, specifically for the actors. Your ensemble is so incredible, and I feel like play these larger-than-life characters in a way that only they could. So what were you looking for in the casting process, and what did that actually look like when you found Matt Berry and the rest of this ensemble?
It's sort of half and half, or almost half and half, as far as Jermaine always had Matt Berry in mind for the Lazzaro part and sort of written that part for him and just sort of said to him at some point, do you want to be in the show? And Matt's like, yeah, okay. So that was easy. The Colin Robinson part, when we were working on the pilot, I knew Mark Proksch's work from Tim Heidecker's On Cinema at the Cinema, which I think is so funny. And I was like, this guy is perfect. And I think he came in and read, but I don't even know if we ever even looked at, I mean, we did look at the other people who read, but Mark was so obviously the front runner, you know. And then Kayvon and Natasha read in England with Taika, and those auditions were a lot, you know, I think it was one quick run through of whatever scenes they had to do, and then it was him interviewing them as if they were those characters.
Oh, okay.
So it was a lot of material that was, you know, that they were just making up on the spot. And some of Natasha's stuff was so funny that actually became the backstory for her character. She made up this whole thing about how in her little village, she used to be the one who would sing to the snakes so that they wouldn't bite people, and that kind of thing. And then the very last one we cast was Harvey, because we just kept looking. And originally, you know, some people were thinking that Guillermo would be an older person, and then you know, there's a debate about older, younger, blah blah blah. And we looked at tons and tons of people, but then Harvey really stuck out with his sort of sweetness.
Yeah.
I think the other thing worth pointing out too is that Mark, Matt, Natasha, Kayvon all have pretty big sketch and comedy backgrounds as well. So they are no stranger to, I think, not only improv, but creating characters and doing bigger, broader comedy bits. So I think that was also helpful, I imagine. I wasn't there.
No, but that's true. That's true. Audition-wise, especially with Kayvon and Natasha, when they came in, it wasn't like them trying to guess what the part was supposed to be. They made strong choices. They, you know, they didn't go overboard, but they all sort of dressed. And I think Kayvon said he got, you know, fake fangs and, you know, worked on the voice they were going to do. So it wasn't those auditions where they're like, can you try it again, but maybe do something else? It was like, this is who it is. You know what I mean? Right. It was a really strong choice audition-wise.
Well, that's what I was going to ask too, especially in that audition process, and maybe for any of the plethora of guest actors that you have coming on, do you find yourself giving notes on how to play a vampire? And because I feel like people obviously have the idea of what that is stereotypically, but what kind of direction are you giving performance-wise for that?
I feel like, I mean, this is kind of an answer to the question, but I feel like I almost have more trouble, or we almost have more trouble either finding people or directing people to be grounded. Which I think a lot of people, they understand what the show is and they know that it's a comedy, it's an ensemble comedy, and we do a lot of improv, and it is big and funny in those ways. But I think the show really works its best when people also know how to play the comedy, but also can be as grounded and as real as possible, because it's the other layer of the show is that it is a mockumentary, and it's our goal to make it feel as real as possible if we can. That's a non-answer to your question, but I feel like that's more of the notes I feel like we end up giving.
A big part of the show, especially when the vampires are out in the real world interacting with people, is that the real people are as real as... Who's that?
Sorry, I have a dog and a doorbell here. One moment.
Hold it. This is a live stream with 302 people watching.
No.
Very professional.
This is the quarantine life. Sorry, guys. All right.
No, so the real people have to play it really real, and it can be hard because they see the vampire characters being so sometimes over the top.
Right.
But I think in the pilot, the guy who played the cashier at the grocery store was so good, and I'm so terrible that I can't remember his name, but that really, to me, set the tone for what it would be like when the vampires interacted with real people. And very, very quickly in season 2, when we were doing the episode with the city council, and we had the woman, the character's name was Barbara Lazzaro, was the head of the city council.
Season 1, episode 2.
Season 1, yeah.
Yeah.
And we wanted to cast her. There were some people who were like, well, she's not funny. And we were like, yeah, but that's the point. She just seems like an absolutely normal, almost seems like a non-actor. She's so normal. And I think that's what made that scene so funny.
But in terms of like everybody else, like Nick Kroll for Simon the Devious, or even Mark Hamill for Jim the Vampire, we never really gave them any notes or direction as far as how it, performance of the character was supposed to look. They
No, it's
kind of
also,
came with an
I
idea.
think it's also fun for some of the guest actors who play vampires because it's a place where you can be over the top in a way. The show's silly, so you can be over the top as a vampire. No one's ever going to go like, "Hey, a real vampire would be a little more." It is a chance to be a little crazier probably than you usually get to be.
For sure. Well, Stephanie, to your point, this is, of course, a mockumentary style. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as the series that you've worked on, this is your first time in that kind of subgenre.
Yes.
What unique challenges or tasks does that come with versus something like Atlanta and the other projects that you and Paul have worked on?
I think that we sort of touched on it already. It's just this idea that everything has to feel as grounded and as real as possible when it doesn't concern our vampires and they are out in the real world. But I think bigger than that, and Paul, we discussed this a lot, that Jermaine in particular is a real stickler when it comes to sticking to documentary rules. So as far as camera movements, as far as audio goes, as far as camera placement, we have our own set of challenges as to like, okay, would a camera crew be floating in the air with the vampires when they're flying? Would a camera crew, does it make sense that they've caught this shot or caught this moment? And it's, I think in that way, it's tougher to write because I feel like, Paul, we've written scenes that make sense dramatically on paper and are funny, but then we really get to the practicality of how we're going to shoot it. We're like, this doesn't even make any sense because how would the camera crew even be here? Why would they be here? Like all that kind of stuff. It's like, it's a very, very narrow parameter that we have to sort of adhere to. So in that way, it's tough because every other show, whether it's, Atlanta or Fargo or whatever, it's, you just write scenes and you shoot the scenes and you're not worried about who's where or does this make sense and would this be real in the same way.
Right.
And also you're always tempted to go like, oh, that's an important part or an emotional part. We should have a close-up of the vampire's face. And then you have to stop yourself and say a documentary crew wouldn't like run and push it on the person's face. So, but it's by sticking to those rules, I think is what gives it its air of authenticity.
Yeah, authenticity in this vampire world.
Yes.
And Paul, I know that you've spoken to it and it's kind of jumping off of this mockumentary style, keeping it real. The special effects are pretty practical as well. You're not relying on CGI.
There's more CGI than you would think. There's a ton of practical stuff, especially with the stunts, but there's more CGI than you think, and that I take as and our CGI crew could take as a great compliment.
Yes, you can.
It doesn't seem like it's real. I think part of it is that in sticking with the documentary style, no matter how big the stunt or the effect is, we never like really focus in on it the way you would do on another show going, oh, we spent all the money on this part, we got to really see it. It always sort of slides by in the background and feels like it was half accidentally captured by the documentary crew, which I think makes it feel a little authentic.
Yeah. Well, while I have you here, again, the Backstage audience is the creators and actors of the world. I'd love to hear the best piece of writing advice that you two have received in your years working in television.
God. That's so hard.
I'll start.
Please.
I'll start, but mine's not received. Mine's the best piece of advice that I give.
Okay.
And that you give?
Yes.
That no one takes?
Yeah. Well, people do. Don't wait to be inspired. You can't wait to be inspired or feel like you're in the mood to write. You have to write every day. Set a goal for yourself, 300 to 500 words, and treat it the way you would with like exercise or jogging. If you haven't done it in a while, you're like, how am I going to sit down? How am I going to start doing this? And once you do it a few days in a row, every day gets easier and you get better. And no time that you spend writing, even if everything you write that day is terrible, it's never wasted because you're teaching yourself to write better. And that's the best advice anyone's ever given about writing.
That's awesome. I would agree with that. And I think I would add on to piggyback off of Paul's advice. It's never going to be perfect. I think for so long, I thought that I had to nail a first draft and everything had to be, exactly as it should be. And I thought that if I was getting notes, this is very early on, like in college, if I was getting notes, it meant I was doing something wrong or I had done something bad. But having been on the other side and actually working, you're never done writing. Like we are writing up until like very literally we are shooting the scene, and sometimes as the scene is being shot, we are writing or rewriting or finding a better way to do it.
We're writing into editing after it's edited.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, his back is to the camera and there's a little something extra we could put in there, or how do we take whatever footage we have and, you know, mix it around to tell something different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something that they don't necessarily tell you when you're studying how to write.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Something else I'd like to pick your brain on, Stephanie. You've spoken a bit about this before, but kind of getting the launch pad of Atlanta. You have said that that platform kind of set the expectation for you to be telling stories about Black 20-something women, because that's what you are. Atlanta aligns itself with that, not genre, but at least topic in a way. But then you followed up with something as awesome as this. So what?
Can I take this one?
Well, I do have a follow-up for you, Paul. Don't worry. But I would love to hear just what the thought process was to pushing back against that expectation, if there was any pushback. How did you kind of navigate that as an early career writer?
I think just early on, I either knew that I wanted to write things that I wanted to write. And that was very early on. I feel like in college as well. Like I knew that if I was going to write something that I didn't care about or felt like I should be writing, that it wasn't going to be good. So I just, it's as simple as that. It's not a crazy, you know, it's not some crazy sort of, you know, insightful answer other than I want to write what I want to write. And I know that if I'm writing things that I care about and I enjoy, then it's always going to be good. So this idea that, you know, because I'm a young person of color, female, I mean, the industry is actively searching more and more for those things, as they should be. But I think the other blind spot that sort of exists over there is this idea that all these young females, minorities, whatever, they need to only be speaking to that voice. And to me, I find that incredibly limiting. And I don't know, at times even more, I won't say offensive because it's not offensive, but this idea that, oh, because you are just a thing, you can only write for a specific voice. And I feel like, you know.
Even Stephanie's script that got her hired on Atlanta was not like, here's my story of my life mildly fictionalized. Right. Much more fantastical, you know. Right.
It was like about a ghost, and like it it was more, I think, about feeling like an aimless person at the time, that I was speaking more to that than like, you know, here's my stamp on socially what's going on. It just sort of felt more like this is what I'm feeling as a human being right now.
Totally. And for that expectation we put in place just because of the identity of the writer, I feel like that negates the inclusivity that that it's wanting to push in the first place.
Exactly. That's a really good question.
Well, we do have a question here from Ralph Anthony. It's a follow-up to your writing advice, Paul. The best writing advice I've ever heard.
Their world has just been rocked.
Exactly. His question here: do you consider journaling a good form of daily writing?
Yes. When I really get specific with that advice to people, I say that emails and letters don't count if you're trying to get to your 300 to 500 thing. And sometimes, I mean, journaling can count. Yeah, as long as because I have tons and tons of journals that I hope no one ever sees, but as long as when you're doing your journaling, it's not just a pure vomit of emotion and what you were thinking, and you're actually thinking a little bit about how the nuts and bolts of how you're expressing your ideas, I think. But yeah, you know what? And it's just like jogging. On a bad day, you're supposed to do 5 miles, and you only do 2 miles, fine. If you only do journaling on one day, that's absolutely fine, as long as you're sitting there physically, actively putting words on a page.
Yeah. And when it comes to writers who want to structure their writing in a way that's not journaling, that's a little more professionally presentable, do you have advice for any tools or online resources for how beginners can kind of cut their teeth?
Yes, I have the best advice you'll ever get. This flies in the face. This advice flies in the face of everything that every writer's room does these days. But I maintain that it is so much better for organizing your thoughts. Use a corkboard and index cards. Don't use a whiteboard. The whiteboard, you write stuff up there. Then when you want to shift something around, you have to erase it and rewrite it over there. When you write things on cards, you go, oh, that goes. Oh no, that goes there. Oh, I don't need those. Blah blah blah. It's a great way of very quickly shifting around your things and getting a whole new overview of what you're doing. I hate whiteboards. I think it's the worst.
I will also say what has been super helpful for me, or was super helpful for me, was I was an assistant at an agency talent agency when I first moved out to LA. And it was my job, as it is the job of most assistants and mailroom people, to do coverage. And you're just reading scripts. You're reading every single script that has been sent into the agency, and you're writing up coverage, and you're basically grading it. It's like you're basically doing homework. But I hated it at the time. I thought it was so awful. It was eating up my weekends. And, most of the time the scripts were bad, but it wasn't until like a year and a half later that I realized just reading like 3 scripts a week, 3 screenplays, good or bad, I was subconsciously absorbing how scripts are structured. And I was able to, by the end of my time there, more quickly point out what I didn't like about a script, what was unclear, what characters didn't make sense, when the story sort of fell apart. And it was something that I wasn't actively trying to do. It was something that I was absorbing. So in that way, I think something like that is helpful. Just get your hands on as many screenplays as possible, good or bad, and just read.
Yeah.
Hold on. I want to have an argument with Tom Fields in the chat. He says Post-it notes work as well as note cards. But with Post-it notes, they all stick together, and then you can't have your nice stack like this going, wow, look at all these ideas we came up with.
I don't know.
But Tom, if you like the Post-it notes, yes, that's better than a whiteboard, as long as it's not a whiteboard.
Better than a whiteboard, for sure. Well, kind of jumping off the fact that Stephanie just made, we have another audience question here. From P-Wish, quick telltale signs of a bad script and signs of a great one. Is there anything that you're looking for that makes you realize, oh, this is garbage, or oh, there's something here?
For me, this is a quick one. It's a pretty big one, and I can get more specific, but for me, I just groan when it feels like a script is trying to sound like something that's already on TV. Mm-hmm. When it doesn't seem like there's any original perspective, or nothing feels specific or real. It just sort of feels like, oh, this person watched Girls and they want to do their version of Girls, and it's like a lateral move. There's nothing specific, or parroting, the mimicking. That for me, I'm always hoping and wishing that when writers are writing scripts, it's unique and there's a perspective there, and I can actually understand what kind of person they are, hopefully, by reading it.
I don't know about telling a great one from a terrible one, but I do feel like these days, a lot of times, and it is good advice that your writing should be personal and come from your life, but people forget to take that extra step and use whatever emotional reality is in their life and create something that's more interesting than just like, blah.
Life. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think a lot of the scripts I read that are not as exciting are like, like they went in and talked to their manager, and their manager said, so where are you from? They're like, well, I'm from, my parents were immigrants from Ecuador, but we were in the Peace Corps, whatever. And the manager's like, that's it, write that script. That's a great jumping off point. But if you can, don't stick to reality. Don't stick to
right. And when I mean to say, like, voice-wise, to Paul's point, it's like, I'm not hoping to read people's autobiographies. It's like, write a fucking script about dinosaurs, but do it in your voice, with your emotional, play to the top of your own intelligence, and do all that stuff in ways that make sense to you.
Oh, hang on. Tom Fields. Yes, it's true that with Post-it notes, you don't need to use thumbtacks, but I mean, they're all going to stick with whatever. Right, I'll take it up with Tom Fields later.
I like that this debate's happening, though. It's about time that someone says what everyone else is thinking. Okay, well, final question for you two. I know we are coming up on the 30-minute mark here. Just congrats again on the Emmys, love for this. Obviously, it's a pretty strange year going into the September 20th ceremony. Do you have any expectations for what that's going to look like? Are you going to be able to be together? take temperatures and test beforehand, or
we're all together right now, the three
Yeah.
of us. And now we're all going to be together, I think, for a while.
I think that's it. Yeah, it's just going to be the way it has been, I think, which is a bummer, but also kind of nice.
Yeah. Well, then there's always the love that's to come for season 3. So hopefully we're out of this by then. Yeah. So that's all I have for both of you today. Thank you so much for spending some time with me in Backstage, and thanks everyone for tuning in our audience. Anything that you want to leave us with before we wrap up here?
I just want to squash the beef with Conchords. I think we're both working towards the same goal. We just have slightly different ways of doing it, and I think Tom and I are getting along fine now.
I'm glad to hear it.
Beautiful.
Bygones be bygones.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, and we'll be in touch. All right.
All right.
Stay well.
Bye.
Bye.